So let's move to the session of panel discussion. Greetings, everyone. Thank you very much for investing your time with us on a Sunday morning, afternoon, and even night. My name is Jian Li, and I'm now a research fellow from Central South University Human Rights Center. It is my great honor to share these moments with all these brilliant panelists. Today, we'll have an amazing panel on human rights today, universal and global, where we will be talking about the changes of human rights from 1948 to 2022. Our goal today is to exchange views of how conditions, perceptions, and human capabilities have changed from her or his own analytical insights or based on personal experience or interests. And more importantly, to have constructive questioning and contests in mutual debate. So the format for giving you an idea of what to expect is as follows. First, I'd invite one panelist to take 3 to 5 minutes to present ideas to start the discussion. Then, before the presentation, we will take a few moments for each of the panelists to briefly introduce themselves and tell a little bit about their background in the area of human rights. And then other panelists would provide feedback to the presenters' ideas or make further comments based on her or his own perspectives. Panelists are encouraged to be concise in the comments, and therefore, we would ask the panelists to limit the comments in 3 minutes. I would intervene when a panel member exceeds the time. Moreover, we will open up the floor to the audience to ask specific questions. I would gather questions from chat room in real time during the panel discussion. Sound good? Great. Let's get started with the panel introductions. First, I would invite Philem Hadmail, hopefully I pronounced your name correctly, to kick off the discussion. Philem, the stage is yours.
And thank you very much. And yes, you have pronounced my name very well. You pronounce my name better than many Irish people pronounce it. So thank you very much. Thank you also for giving me the opportunity to be here today. I appreciate it, and I appreciate particularly Peter for inviting me and Professor Mai for inviting me here. I suppose one of the difficulties that somebody like me has in talking to this particular audience is that I come from the global north rather than the global south. And whilst my country, Ireland, understands to some extent the experience of people in the global south because we went through a period of globalization, colonization. So we have a certain amount of empathy with people. We know what it's like to suffer famine and starvation from our history. We know what it's like to suffer massive immigration because that has been the experience of the Irish nation. And if I could say something, that in the mid-19th century, Ireland as an island had 8 million of a population, 8 million people. Up until the 1990s, the island of Ireland had a population of just over 4 million. Today, we have a population on the island of 6 million. Now, what I'm saying is that in a period of 150 years, when most nation states were increasing their population, the population of Ireland was decreasing. In the mid-19th century, it was 8 million. Today, it's about 6 million. Now, think about that. And the reason for that is because of our experience of colonialism, our experience of poverty, our experience of famine. So Irish people are in a unique position to understand the suffering of people in the Global South and the oppression of people in the Global South and the inequalities that are foisted upon them by an inequitable global economic system and by past and continuing imperialist adventures and neo-imperialist adventures in the Global South. And that's important to remember, because sometimes when you hear Irish political leaders talk today as part of the European Union, you think of them as part of the rich world. And the Irish people, I suppose, are now part of the rich world, because Ireland as a state is one of the richest countries in the world per capita. It's about the 6th or 7th or 8th, depending on what indices that you use. So we're in a situation where we are, if you like, we're in a situation of privilege, because we span both the rich world and the poor world. We span the global north and the global south. And in terms of ordinary people in Ireland have a collective memory which gives them empathy with those who are going through pain and suffering. And maybe our political leaders and our political elites who have benefited from capitalism, who have benefited from joining forces with the northern western powers to control the world economy, if you like, and to be part of that world economy. Those particular elites, some of them may have forgotten that collective memory, but the vast majority of Irish people maintain that collective memory. And I just think that that's important to contextualise this in terms of understanding where I'm particularly coming from in relation to this type of stuff. When we talk about human rights, and I know you probably don't want me to talk too much, when we talk about human rights, it seems to me that everybody is in favour of human rights until they have to do something about it. And if what they have to do to promote human rights is to give up something that they have, some of the power that they have, some of the economic resources that they have, to give that up to others, then most of us are not prepared to do that. And I think that really the problem that we have globally is a particular system which promotes individuals over collectivities, which promotes the pursuit of profit over the promotion of welfare and the realization of need. That particular system is something that needs to be addressed. Having said that, it's very, very difficult to dismantle a system that's been in operation for a couple of 100 years. And so what we have to work on is work in the place that we actually happen to be. We have to unite with like-minded people in the place where we happen to be. And we have to work with people in other contexts, in other places who are like-minded as well, to try to minimize the destruction of a system which, in my view, is not pursuing human rights and pursuing human welfare. We have to limit the destruction of that system, and we have to limit it often by piecemeal methods. So, for example, we need to promote collective ownership. We need to promote cooperation. We need to minimize the destruction of capital, the destruction of wealth, and by regulation. So it's basically about trying to promote in a piecemeal way until such times as we're able to dismantle that system fully. But at this point in time, we're not. We have to promote in a piecemeal way the regulation of global capitalism, and we have to promote cooperation in terms of the provision of services and in the provision of the necessities for the welfare of humanity. So I think that's where we have to go, and that's what we have to do. There's no point in turning around saying there's going to be a revolution tomorrow and we're going to overthrow the system, because it's going to take an awful lot longer than that. And all of us know that when you have a revolution, you create your own problems as well following from that, because often people aren't brought with you and you end up consumed in internal conflicts, etc. So I don't know if that's what you're looking for from me. It sounds maybe not, it's maybe idealistic or whatever it's not meant to be.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Phelan. Thanks for kicking off the discussion. Does any discussant want to give comments or make some give some response to Phelan's? Okay, I saw. Yeah. Professor Peter Herman. Yes, please.
Well, I think Phelan mentioned a hugely important point. The move from being a colony to be part of the rich North. We talked today about North and global North and global South, and I want to point a little bit out, having invited these speakers. The idea was really to have somebody there from the so-called, or what we may think, say it's the different parts of the world. So it is obviously what Phelan just said, former colony now being part of the global North, being rich. South Africa, Latin America is clear as well. Turkey, the so-called threshold country, part of the so-called threshold countries, being now in China, the same so-called threshold countries, moving forward and changing the entire setting. We do not have the old traditional understanding. We will engage in this. Something had been said already about individuals and the we and I. I want to, instead of extending my contribution here, I want to ask specifically somebody from the floor to address one very important question. It is how we relate to each other. We are not national countries, but we relate to each other. There is a colleague attending from, actually, I don't know if you are from Cuba or if you are from Canada, or if you are, well, you are definitely somewhat from Cuba, Arnold August. I would really appreciate you taking the floor now and engaging in this question, especially how we relate to each other, the commonalities of Cuba and China, and the role of in the global order.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction. Just to clarify, I'm not from Cuba. I'm born and raised in Montreal. However, I spent quite a lot of time in Cuba, several years, studying specifically the political process there. And also in my doctorate years, master's years, I did study China. And recently I had a very fruitful, interesting visit to China. And so today I'm going to deal with perhaps one of the most controversial issues with regards to human rights, that is the democracy, political parties. Now, the US-centric notion of democracy or political parties is very simple. It's based on the liberal capitalist notion that there must be competing political parties representing different fractions of the ruling circles. Of course, they don't call it that, but that's what it amounts to. Now, in my view, this is completely arbitrary. In the case of China, China does have other political parties in addition to the Communist Party of Cuba. We take another example, Cuba only has one party. Even then, it's completely arbitrary. The way the United States presents these countries as being undemocratic because of it doesn't have political parties, nor does it have direct elections for the president. How do I know that it's arbitrary? Let's take an example of Venezuela. Mary Francisco knows that. In Venezuela, there are many political parties. There are elections between opposing political parties. And in addition, you have direct elections for the president of the country there. Still, the United States is not satisfied, and they want to overthrow that government. So the main point I'm making here is in the question of number of political parties is completely arbitrary. It's weaponized by the West, the United States, and its allies in order to try to overthrow these governments. Now, I would like to there's one in the UN Charter of Human Rights. I think there is one article, in my view, that is not dealt with enough. I'm referring to Article 21, Clause 1, which says that everybody has the right to partake in the government of his country, either directly or indirectly through freely chosen representatives. Let's take a look at that. Now, what I like about this, they talk about directly participating. Now, the example of both China and Cuba, far from being countries that violate this human right, they actually are amongst the best examples of how this takes place. Let us take the example of participating in the government of their own country. The Chinese Revolution and the Cuban Revolution were carried out, leadership, yes, but only as a result of the masses of people actually taking part in that revolution that succeeded in China in 1949 and in Cuba in 1959. So the people participate in overthrowing, and as immediate outcome of it, they participated in the actual elaboration of the government, its political system, etc. Now so this is actually a model, perhaps in a future United Nations amendment to what we have now. They should perhaps think about how to elaborate that point, that people participate directly through revolution in their own countries. But I think that's unlikely to happen. But now I'd like to deal with another narrative, US-centric narrative, and that is especially from the liberal quarters, saying that, okay, we recognize in China you have made many advances in terms of health, education. This applies to Cuba, both Cuba and China. You've made advances with regards to health, education, sport, culture, etc. But there's violation of the political rights of the people. I think that this is a false narrative, because this very Article 21.1, that is, people participating in the government of their own country, either directly or indirectly, this political power, revolutionary political power that came into being in 1949 and 1959, respectively, it is this political power, whether the West likes it or not, that allows these important human rights, such as the right to health, education, culture, sports, etc. It is as a result of the political power that this can come about, not despite it. And so I think we cannot be defensive with regards to the issue of revolutionary political power in these countries as the basis for these human rights. And not only that, provides a moral authority to these countries such as China and Cuba as an example that, look, we have organized a revolution in our countries, and as a result of this, we can fully develop the basic human rights that are elaborated in the UN Charter of Human Rights. So that's basically it. I hope I haven't gone beyond my whatever limit is of 10 minutes, but I'm very open to questions. I know this is a very controversial topic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks for Anna's perspective from the comparison between China and Cuba and the perception of human rights with regards to the UN Charter, the human rights defined in this charter. Okay, does anyone intends to respond further?
Can I say something?
Yes, please, Mehmet.
I want to make a relatively short contribution by, of course, agreeing to the concrete suggestions and things which were mentioned, which I think a critical audience already knows. I mean, the role of the USA, of imperialism, all these things I don't want to go into. But I want to say something different on a more, let's say, general theoretical level. I think the problem is nowadays with human rights that we have to see again, this is was already mentioned before, the ideological notion of human rights, and we should undermine this. We can see worldwide, and this is something everyone would say if he or she is critical. We have nowadays looked to the world, to the misery of the world, but on the other side, we have tons of publications, tons of publications concerning human rights on different levels formulated by national or international actors and or networks. For example, the European Union is producing daily human rights documents, for example, concerning migration or other topics. But in a dialectical sense, this was concretized by the speakers and myself, but in a dialectical sense, the contrary happens worldwide. I think this is the same thing with morality. The more we speak of morality, the more morality is exterminated. This is an old dialectical, I think, finding. So what we have to do, and this is what I meant, I think I couldn't go too much into the topic because of time limitations. This is what I mean by undermining the ideological notion of human rights. I think by establishing what we should do in a general sense, independent from continents or countries. For example, we have spoken of Ubuntu, of these things. Okay, this can be discussed, but I think we should try to undermine this ideological notion again of human rights by establishing a sort of moral universalism, which I call it. Not in an abstract sense, based on social struggles. So the social struggles which have resulted in certain general criteria, for example, equality, for example, the equality between men and women, for example, the right of education, etc. All the things which should be mentioned, but we have no time. So these universal criteria based on social struggles should be mentioned again. And this is the reason why I said this pandemic situation, maybe, despite all the worse results or bad results, could be a potentiality for this. So human rights should be again, and I know that this is general, but what should we say? Should be again the manifestation or reflection of material living and working conditions. And this is what I meant also with the topic of Turkey, which I could not touch upon too much, because with participation, I meant exactly this manifestation or reflection, not of abstract ideas, of material living and working conditions. And I would say, I would call this also, my final words for now, I would call this also the socialization of human rights, the socialization of human rights, which brings us away from these abstract formulations, from abstract commissions. One example, which I mentioned in other groups, we have not only publications nowadays, which are not practiced. On the contrary, we have, for example, ethical commissions. We could ask, why are ethical commissions really doing something concretely, or are they only ideological tools to continue this ideological notion? So again, the socialization of human rights are needed. And I think this is something where the progressive actors of every society could maybe go together. And the things which Fedim said, what Arnold said, etc., what we all have mentioned, I think should culminate in such a new cooperation. And this was also mentioned. This is also only a sort of summary, which I tried to bring again to the foreground. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much, Mehmet. Thanks for your contribution, especially from the perspective of the socialization of human rights and also like the ideological notion of human rights. I noticed that Dr. Wang Huiru has already hands up. Okay.
Thank you for giving me this chance to share my few points with you. Well, I really appreciate Professor August's brilliant speech to bring us to this very interesting and core issue of human rights, which is democracy. But definitely it is really a common value of humanity and ideal that's being not only cherished by the people around the world, but also the Chinese people. So over the past century, we have witnessed the Communist Party of China bring Chinese people out of poverty and realizing the Chinese way of democracy, which is truly to allow the people to hold the hands of future and the process of the whole process of democracy, which is really, in my perspective, should be better understood by the West or other countries, because the Chinese way of democracy is an integration of not only the process-oriented democracy, but also the results-oriented democracy. And it combines the direct democracy with indirect democracy. So it is quite different from the Western system, but I have a strong sense that much of it has been misunderstood. So I think what's behind and underlying this issue is that we really have to deepen our understanding towards each other's cultural differences and maybe different systems and different ways of developing our own paths of its own characteristics. That being said, we have the Chinese character. We have the Chinese path of human rights with Chinese characteristics. But I still agree with most of what you said, that the human rights we have today should be upheld. But one thing I really want to point out is to be really aware of the abuse of human rights, or human rights being weaponized as, diplomatic boycott or humanitarian intervention or human rights diplomacy, as we've seen in the practice of the United States. So I really wonder how you, from your point of view, how you view the enactment of a large number of laws relating to human rights from the United States, linking human rights with, for example, military assistance or unilateral sanctions, as well as voting in multilateral platforms. So that might be my question for the audience as well as the experts. So if somebody could help me to clarify, I would be very appreciated. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Weru. Yeah, I see Arnold, hands up. It seems that you are going to give some further response.
Yeah, very shortly. Thank you very much. A very interesting comment. With regards to Chinese characteristics of democracy, on the question of that momentous historic accomplishment of bringing millions of people out of poverty. A very important role is being played by the leadership. I've seen so many reports of President Xi goes to outlying areas in China, finding out about the problems of poverty, making sure that the people there, whether they're members of the party or not, are following through on the goal of China to alleviate millions of people or billions of people out of poverty. So it is an ongoing process in which the government, far from sitting in an office in Beijing, is actually out in the field dealing with what is happening, dealing with the people need and how to solve the problem. Let me give you an example from Cuba. It'll help us perhaps develop this discussion. People are probably aware of the attempt by the United States and its allies to subvert the Cuban government in November 15th, 2021, through heavily financed mercenaries, as they rightly call them, in Cuba. Now, how was it stopped? By the leadership there, the government, the leadership in the neighborhoods, carrying out extensive work amongst the people in the grassroots to make sure that people are clear about what is happening and not to fall into the US narrative that that there's no human rights in Cuba, the government has to be overthrown. And they actually succeeded. That attempt by the United States on November 15th was a debacle. It did not work. So there are many examples how Cuba, China, by getting involved directly with the people, they are able to overcome, in the case of Cuba, an attempt to overthrow it, and in the case of China, that momentous program of bringing millions of people out of poverty.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor August. Thank you for your answer.
Yes. Yeah, Professor Peter Herman?
I think what is important looking at or comparing something is Feynman mentioned the situation of Ireland. And Ireland is now one of the countries that is frequently mentioned as especially well pursuing its development. What I think is important, Arnold mentioned the importance of democracy. And then it came up, what is democracy about? And what happened in Ireland is actually a development that had been a kind of submission under a certain way of development. And I think this is important as well when we talk about human rights. There is the notion of the right to development. But the question is development about adapting to a specific way of development, a specific economic system, or is it finding its own terms? And this is, I think, very important in the future that we have to look at this. China has the SOEs, the state-owned enterprises. That's just the opposite of what happened in Ireland and happens in Europe and happens in so many other countries, the privatization. And this is not only a matter of the economy, but it is as well a privatization of rights. Because if you are working as a completely private enterprise, and if you are a completely private employee, what is the consequence? The right is only the one to survive. It cannot be different because you have to survive. If you are in a secure situation, if you are in a state-owned enterprise, there may well be, and we have in China some problems in some sectors. We have problems of so-called overproduction or whatsoever. But this is a matter of development. We can change this, and this means we can change it. In the West, in Ireland, in Germany or whatever, we cannot change it. It is left to the private entrepreneur, and whatever they decide is going to happen. And we have, linking to one other topic briefly that had been mentioned, digitization, artificial intelligence. This is especially there, very obvious. In China, we now try to control this sector and say there must be the question of harvesting and of processing data, there must be a control. And it is in the interest of society, it is controlled by societies. The way of processing is not to control people, but to improve their life, improve their living. The opposite, if we look at the surveillance development in many countries, Microsoft, Facebook, Google could be in complete control and taking over government. And I think this is a very important point as well. What kind of development? Ireland is one of the best performing countries now in the EU, but there is a huge price, I think, that has to be had been paid already, and that will have to be paid in the future as well.
Maybe I could say something just in relation to Ireland.
Yes, please, Phelan, go ahead.
I think that one of the things that you have to remember, that not you, but that everybody has to remember when we talk about Ireland, is that Ireland emerged as a colonized country or from colonialism, but we still live with the legacy of colonialism. Maria, for example, was talking about Latin America and the legacy of colonialism in Latin America. Ireland lives with the legacy of colonialism and that legacy as a colonized people. Like Germany, France, Britain live with the legacy of colonialism, and as does the United States of America, though it claims never to have been a colonizing power, but it is. It's an imperialist power. That those countries live with the legacy of colonialism, but as colonizers. And the legacy of colonialism to them has had a different effect on them in comparison to the legacy of colonialism in Ireland. What has happened in Ireland is that Ireland fought to achieve an end to colonialism. And it didn't succeed, to be honest, if truth be told. What we have is a divided country, geographically, north and south, and that is because the colonial power refused to give independence to Ireland. It refused to listen to calls for an Irish democracy in the 18th century and the early 20th century, and we have a divided country. But the colonial power, in order to maintain control over hundreds of years, also divided the people. It divided the people by providing differential forms of citizenship depending on ethnic background. And a minority in the population had privileges over a majority. And that lasted over hundreds of years. And the legacy of that has meant that we remain a divided country. And also, we suffer from the fact that we are a divided country because we have been unable to unite around a whole series of proposals for the development of the society. And one of the options that people have chosen has been, rather than overthrow colonial ideas or the ideas of the colonists, what we've tended to do is accept the ideas of colonists. So, for example, in 1921, whenever there was a war of independence and Britain imposed a treaty on Ireland, it said that if you don't accept, on the Irish revolutionaries, if you don't accept this treaty, which meant the partition of your country, and we'll keep half of it, we'll keep the northern half, and you can keep the southern half, right? If you don't accept that, there'll be terrible and immediate war. And Irish people accepted, the majority of them accepted that treaty, and there was a civil war over it and all the rest of it. Okay? A lot of the people, in order to ingratiate themselves with the European powers, with Britain, etc., adopted a similar type of system, a similar type of system in terms of capitalism, in terms of balancing the books. This is before Keynesianism, economics, the notion that you should balance the books. A revolution that came about not just as a result of a demand for national democracy and national liberation, but social liberation, liberation from poverty for the people. Because the vast majority of the population were living in absolute poverty at the time of that revolution in the 1920s. The new government that comes in 1922-23, an Irish government in the south of Ireland, one of the first measures that it introduces is it cuts old age pensions in order to balance the books, in order to show the Western European powers that it's economically and fiscally sensible as a government. It should be accepted as such. I want to read you something. And I don't want to hog this about Ireland, but Ireland was mentioned. In 1919, when the revolution was still taking place in Ireland, the government in exile that had been elected by the people, by the way, by a majority of the population of Ireland, they set up their own government. They refused to have anything to do with British rule. They set up their own government called Dáil Éireann, right? So this was a democratically elected government, and this is what their program was. In 1919, we declare that the nation's sovereignty extends not only to all men and women of the nation, but to all its material possessions, the nation's soil and all its resources, all the wealth and all the wealth producing processes within the nation. And we reaffirm that all right to private property must be subordinated to the public right and welfare. That was in 1919. By 1922, we were cutting old age pensions, cutting teachers' wages, conforming to the world capitalist order of the day, which wasn't even based on Keynesian welfarism or anything like that. And we remained in poverty as a result. Now, to go back to what Peter had said, that we've fitted in with, the Irish state has fitted in with the world economic order, that's true, because they thought it was the easiest option. They didn't take an alternative path. And those leaders that were arguing for social change, social revolution, most of them were actually killed in the Civil War and in the war against Britain. People like James Connolly, and with the result that we ended up with the type of leadership we have. But having said all that, in Ireland today, we're in a state of flux. And there is a potential for change, for social change to take place. People are now throwing off some of the old ideas, the conservative ideas, which were imposed on them through churches, etc. We're now embracing a much more secular society, which is, I think, progressive. And then I suppose the argument then is, well, will we move towards a much more socially orientated society, away from this notion of the pursuit of profit? And that's up for grabs. And I think it was said earlier, just in relation to Cuba, I think Arnold said about how it's important for people to be working at grassroots level to bring about fundamental change. And I think that is happening. The question is whether the people who are working at grassroots level, using their own agency and working together on a range of different campaigns, whether they will be able to achieve the successes that are required. It sounds like I'm talking too much, so maybe I will shut up. That would be.
Okay, yes, Maria. So do you want to give further response?
Yes, thank you everybody for such interesting questions. No, I think here one of the main topic that it was touched was, for example, by Peter and other professor, is the concept of democracy. No, and as well as I don't remember who was talking about socialization of human rights as well. No, so I think that the two questions are intimate linked, no, between them. For example, we are also think about a reduced definition of democracy. I mean, a political democracy, no possibility of votation, but democracy is something more. If we think about Aristotle's definition, the democracy wasn't a good form to govern a state, no, a polis, but it was the politeia. So we actually are using this term democracy with the content of another category, conceptual category created by ancient Greek Aristotle, no? That is politeia. Politeia means citizenship. So that's why democracy is work. Democracy is working when citizens are really active, are really politically involved inside the society, because otherwise it's another form of dominate the citizens, no? So if we mean this citizenship perspective, that is what we are saying, talking about people-centered approach, for example, now in which population is inside it. For example, in Italy, we have, for example, two philosophers, two juridical philosophers who talk about this. For example, Marco Guzzi actually is talking about democracy as a democracy of the least of society. I mean, modern slaves, refugees, children, women, people with disabilities, etc. The democracy has to be inspired toward this kind of part of society, to include them inside the society, because otherwise it's a sort of tyranny by the government to the people. No, so democracy is not an efficient, we can say, no, it's an efficient system because it is democratic system, no? So it's not inspired by the economic achievement, no? But towards the inclusion of all members of society, especially the member of society that can't have an occasion, can't have access in it, no? And I want to quote also another very important philosopher of law, that is Norberto Bobbio, who was always affirming that social democracy is not political democracy as well, but it, I quote literally, no? Democracy, social democracy is intended, the democracy that aims to reduce and progressively eliminate the social, economic, and cultural gaps in the population. So this people-centered approach that we have to consider implies also a practical and active role of citizens. But now we are witnessing, unfortunately, to a sort of bottom-ups and delegitimization of this, because we assist to a sort of empty citizenship, no? Passive society that is accepting everything. So I think these are key issues in terms of realization and improvement of human rights. So thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Maria. It seems that Maria has switched the topic from human rights to democracy, though the two topics are really closely related. Okay, I see Mehmet has handed up, and it seems that Mehmet has much to say as a professor of political science. Yes, please, Mehmet.
I only want to make a short, I hope, constructive intervention. I was the one who said socialization, but we should be cautious, I think, because don't forget that in the 20th century, I know that everyone of you knows this, we have also something like reactionary mass movements. Huh? Think of fascism. So I think we cannot say, we should mention this topic based on different socioeconomic formations in the 20th century, when the formerly passive parts of the middle classes came to the political stage. They did not do anything which could be called progressive, and they were used by the right. So I think this should also be mentioned. I think with socialization, I mean we should go more than to the activities of people. This is not enough. I meant we should look to the content of activities. And we have spoken about this. Huh? So democracy should be defined, and we should really look to the contents of demands, of the how can we say, of the tendencies of social struggles. I mentioned this. So without looking to this concreteness of things, then again, we would repeat and reproduce what I meant, and also people like Feli meant this. Then we would reproduce, I think, the ideological side of this debate. This is also important, because this was always done, huh? This activity is necessarily good. No, activity is not necessarily good. We can have, again, reactionary mass movements, demanding, for example, how can we say, a clerical system, huh? This can be a mass movement, more in a certain extent. I mean, we cannot analyze. So again, socialization means we should again look to the contents of demands, to the people who are demanding something, and to their historical location, to the historical locations in which they are participating. This was only an intervention in parentheses, what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mehmet. Thanks for Mehmet's claim that we need to look into the content of the demand, in particular the concrete list of the activities. So I saw, both Professor Peter Herman and Antonio, they handed up. So, so can I abuse my moderation? So first we will have Antonio. Yes. Yeah, Peter, you will be the next. Antonio, please.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Good morning. I've been listening with big interest to your presentations and discussion. I'm afraid my field of work is a bit much different from the most of the people here, because I'm from psychology, and I would just like to leave the main question that this debate represents to me. And I would say, for me, the main question is it possible to articulate a definition of human rights that is independent from a cultural, social, local interpretation of these human rights? I think that this is a question that arises from this debate, which, and I would just like, of course I don't have a solution for this, but I would just like to appeal to two criteria that might bring maybe some clarity. I don't know if a solution to this is the biological and the psychological criteria, in the sense that maybe something that might be universal somehow is the pain of people. And when I talk about pain, I talk about physical pain, first of all, of course, and I talk about psychological pain. And it seems to me that being all humans, we all share these two kind of reactions, or if you want, this reaction of pain and suffering. Maybe this could be a basis that gives us some window to something that is common and where human rights could be based. I know that this is very general, and I know that it's difficult to articulate, but this is okay. This is the reaction I would like to share from more a psychological perspective. Thank you very much.
Yes, Peter. So would you like to give comments to Mehmet's conception of the concrete list of the democracy or human rights, or would you like to give answers to Antonio's question from the psychological perspective?
Well, it's a little bit on both, I think. It is important to concentrate on the content, but at the same time, and this is why I said take Antonio first, there is another thing. The form and content belong together. And we talked about people, and we have to talk about populism as well. We talked about individuals when we have to talk about, we talked about individualism, but we did not talk so much about individuals. I think this is a hugely important tension we have to look, that on the one hand, with this economic system, we have this separation, not only of powers, but as well of individuals. We have these networks like Twitter making it possible for an American, now I don't say what I think about him, to be president of the country via Twitter, via short messages, via fooling people and disguising things what actually happened. So this is content and form at the same time. We don't have time anymore to say something more profound. And this is why I said Antonio has another hobby. It's not only psychology, but it's arts. Arts as a profound expression of bringing content abroad, and in a deep way bringing content abroad. And this is, I think, something we have to look at, what people not only want, but what they can achieve if they are allowed to live their potentials. Having, I think Maria said it, Arnold said it before, I think, what China achieved in terms of education. And it is, of course, something that is hugely important, that is empowering people, that it allows them to do something. And what I really appreciated when I was teaching at another university in China, also in Changsha, I was teaching economics, one of these terribly dry subjects as well. And one of the students said, we wanted to arrange a meeting. And she said, I don't have time. I have to study music. I have to go to music course. I think this is so important, to bring the different perspectives together. This is really what education is about, to have a broad approach to what we are studying, what we are learning, what we are researching. And this is as well a matter of developing individuals, not individualism. This individualism with the economic system as we have it now, competition between enterprises, between countries, between individuals. I think this belongs together, and there we have to address important questions, and there we have to appreciate as well the BRICS countries working together, not in terms of comparative and competitive advantage, but as a matter of cooperative advantage. This is something which we always or frequently forget. We have other initiatives like this, and we have something, if I look at the European Union and how they dealt with the pandemics, actually, we have a terrible and very sad confrontation between countries, within countries. And coming back to content, I read recently something, I don't know if I have to cry or if I have to laugh, politicians using as well Twitter to post photos of what they are eating. And they are very, people are apparently very keen to get this, because there is no content anymore. This is taken away. And this is, I think, as well, something where we have to look at the means of having fora to discuss things, of having an education system that is open and that enables people and societies, and people, I mean as well, people in terms of not individuals, but people working together.
Yes, George. I noticed that you are well prepared. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. You know, I've been listening to the presentations, and the intervention of Antonio got me really thinking, and I want to build on this on it with my comment. I agree with you, Antonio, that there should be something universal, you know, that should bring us together as human beings. Pain is one of them. Suffering is another one, you know. But the reality of the matter, and it's something that I was touching on earlier when I was moderating, is that human beings tend to act that like there is nothing like that, you know. And I'll explain a little bit more. Two places that I visited that even today I'm still horrified. One, there's Apartheid Museum in South Africa. I don't know if any of you had a chance. Should you have a chance to come to South Africa, I would urge you to visit the Apartheid Museum, you know, just to have a sense of what apartheid did to the people. The second place that I've been to, actually three, the second place that I've been to is in Cape Coast, the home city of Dr. Coleman. He was there and he told me afterwards that he could see the pain, you know, I was quiet for a long time, at the Cape Castle, where people would walk and peep through a little hole into the dungeon. Upstairs is a church, downstairs is a dungeon with slaves sobbing and all that. Another place is the Buchenwald, you know, concentration camp, where after that visit, our host had to organize a counseling session just for us to make sense of a trauma. What am I getting at? The biggest problem today with human rights is because certain people think they have human rights and others do not deserve or are not worthy of the same rights that they think they should enjoy. Or we all suffer from pain, we can all experience pain, but others feel as long as they perpetrate it on others, as long as it's not them, then it should be fine. So at the end of the day, I think the point that Peter mentioned, that, you know, basically we need to educate the people. And one simple thing, a simple fact I learned from one colleague that I didn't pay too much attention to, was that the difference between us, Black, you know, Indian, Chinese, European, and all that, the percentage is so small. But it's amazing how much that little percentage is used to violate human rights. We feel the same pain, we feel suffering, we feel hunger. Should we all be locked in one room with the same, at the same time, we will all feel hunger together. But there would be those that would believe that their rights are more superior than others. I think the biggest issue, and for the future, today, tomorrow, and forever, let me put it that way, it's how we deal with this thing that people should stop, nations should stop, communities should stop, society should stop believing that they are better than others, or for their survival, for their growth, for their success, they should be on top of others. Because at the end of the day, I believe through human rights, as a you know, global community, our success depends on each other. Look at the pandemic. You know, irrespective of the debates about where it started, but it affects all of us. So our fortunes are closely intertwined to the point that I believe that mentality of what happened at Cape Coast Castle, where people go to church on a Sunday like this and look through the hole and not see fellow human beings, but just see maybe, I don't know, animals or something like this. And the list goes on. Or like the Nazis that use human skin to make lampshades, not feeling that, you know, this is another human being. Would I stand this if this was done to me? Because the problem often with human rights is people who violate human rights distance themselves from the pain and the suffering that those on the receiving end are experiencing. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little bit emotional, but I think the problem is addressing this core and sensitive issue, which apparently is less than 3% or something like that, which makes us different. If I can feel hunger, I should be able to think, you know, there are other people that I, as a leader, deprive, you know, of food on the table because I'm corrupt. Because often this violation of human rights starts with one's greed. Let us be honest. It starts with one's greed. An individual's greed, a group of politicians' greed, a nation's greed, you know, and then the list goes on. Let me pause there, but I thought I should chip in here. And thank you, Antonio, for this input. And Peter, you have started on the right course, you know, about the issue of education, educating the future generation. Our children, our grandchildren should see their, you know, counterparts in China, in Africa, other African countries, in Europe, in Latin America and everywhere as brothers and sisters, because our fortunes are tied together. Take the issue of the environment and, you know, global warming. It's not something that will survive as individuals, something that will survive as a globe, you know, as a global community and so on. Let me pause there, colleagues. Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry for being passionate, but it touched somewhere, you know, the input of Antonio touched somewhere. Thank you, colleagues.
Yeah, thanks, George. Yes, Antonio, can I make a very short comment here towards George? Yes, and yeah, I totally agree that George said that, okay, no subject, including the society, the party, the state, should think that their definition of human rights is better than others. And actually, your comment, your introductory speech impressed me very deeply at the very beginning of the during the keynote speech. You said that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go long, then go together. Okay, so Antonio, yes, please.
Oh, thank you. I think that what was just said now is a kind of implication from a conceptualization of some common basis for human rights, which is the problem of dehumanization. So the infraction of human rights is based on a dehumanization of the other, because this is the only way of justifying that we can impose on another being the alienation of rights that we claim for ourselves. And I just remember a talk I had with Peter some days ago about the fact, for instance, that there was this conception that some human beings don't feel pain like the others, from a physiological point of view. And this would justify, for instance, that some ethnic groups could be punished by other ethnic groups because this punishment wouldn't have the same consequence that they have on some people. So just summarizing, it seems to me, in a very naive and a very spontaneous analysis, that we should talk also about a meta right, which is the right to be recognized as human. So in order to have human rights, we also need to claim the right that every human is recognized as human, which seems a bit strange, but it's still something that we need to do. Thank you.
Yes, Mehmet. Yes,
I want
please.
to say again something to Antonio, something, Antonio, provocative. And don't understand me wrong, but what you said now isn't this exactly only a question? Because I understand all the things from George, from you, of course. Also what Peter said, the connection between content and form, okay. Also aesthetics is a form of what we need. This is an old, also product of social struggle. Look to Bertolt Brecht. Huh? Life is more than only food. It's more than this, we know this. But if you say this, that we should be recognized as humans, huh? Antonio, isn't this exactly formulated in the 48 declaration, to be provocative? Huh? This is both a chance, what you say, to be, I think, again, it is both a chance, what you say, and something we would all accept, but isn't it at the same time something ideological, because it was already declared in the 48 manifestation. And we know that this 48 Declaration of Human Rights was, at least in my opinion, still abstract, still, how can we say, not implementative. So this is only one question we should think about, because we speak of socialization of human rights, we speak of social struggle, we speak of equality and all the things, and then we will somehow go back to the beginning. And the beginning of such a formulation, in my eyes, as a political scientist, has again something ideological. I don't know if I could articulate myself correctly. It is both something I understand from you, because I know you, because it is at the same time the rhetoric in a political standpoint, from a political framework scene. It is exactly the rhetoric which is articulated worldwide in these organizations. So I think, again, there is this tension which we should dissolve. And this is what I meant with concretization. I mean, excuse me, Antonio, I know what you mean, Antonio, but again, from an ideological critical standpoint, I wanted to say this. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Mehmet, before Antonio responds. So, Mehmet, Peter. Peter, yes.
Yeah, there is the question, Francesca was talking about the polis as the most important unity entity where actually participation takes place. Now, there is another term frequently coming up, that's the global village. So the global polis, if we want to say, to use this term. In Ireland, being a Catholic country, there had been this joke: if you go to a hospital, you are asked, are you Catholic or are you Protestant? And then you say, no, I'm actually atheist. And then they ask, are you actually Protestant atheist or are you Catholic atheist? It is so difficult to understand that I am atheist. I'm not Catholic, not Protestant, not Buddhist, not whatsoever. Question, I know some of you, Jan, yourself, Mehmet, others, myself, we changed countries. We did not live in what would be called our nation. And I frequently actually don't know what to think about it, but you are German. I have a German passport. I have had an Irish driving license. I have had an identity card from Italy. I don't know where I belong. Now, there is something German where I would say, yes, there is. I had been growing up there, and so the one thing, how or should we work on overcoming this nationality? And I said in my initial contribution, this was a great thing of the Universal Declaration. It's the acceptance of universality and the independence and the national sovereignty. So if perhaps it's just a question, if you have experiences studying, for instance, and that's asking or trying to move on to some other of the attendees, studying in the Netherlands, being Chinese, are you becoming, or what is the feeling as well about how human rights are seen in a country like the Netherlands? So perhaps if I may ask directly Sheng, if she can, having this contribution currently, living in this, if she can contribute, I think something very important of experience. It's this tension, this ambiguity, or this overcoming all this.
Yeah, thanks, Peter. Antonio, would you like to say a few more words as a response to Mehmet? Yeah, and Changsha. So we are waiting for your contribution. You're the next.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Mehmet. I understood you very well, and I think your point is very important. But combining with the intervention of Peter, maybe we should acknowledge that our tendency as human beings to create groups that are different on the basis of some criteria will always bring us the need to remind and go back to the notion that we are all entitled to be recognized as humans. So I understand your point that this socialization, this discourse on human rights is far from its implementation, from the concretization. But maybe the problem is that if we have a tendency, and okay, from my point of view, of course, this has to do with our way of thinking, our psychological tendency to group and to create groups according to certain criteria. If we have this tendency, we need to keep fighting this tendency, and we need to keep reminding. So this is an unfinished business, in the sense that we can't reach a solution, we can't reach a state where we recognize this. We have to keep on reminding, and we need to keep on fighting. The question is for me, and okay, this is just my idea, is that maybe we need to change the discourse, because after a while people don't listen anymore. So it's also a question of form, and some of the people here know that I'm interested in how arts can contribute to human rights, and I think that arts explore different languages. And by the way, arts are a universal language, can be a universal language that can bridge different cultures. Okay, this is not a total solution, but it's, for me, this is part of the solution, because we can work on a registry that is common, and it's not so local. Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. Antonio and Shengxi. So before your presentation, would you please introduce yourself a little bit? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lee, and thank you all the professors and the experts in today for sharing your insightful, inspiring thoughts and ideas. And I'm a PhD candidate of Central South University Human Rights Center, and I'm now studying in Amsterdam, the Netherlands. And I have been here for over 1 year, and I just noticed that some of our experts mentioned we should take into consideration of the social systems and the cultural contexts and the local circumstances of each country when we're considering the protection of human rights. And yeah, I really agree that, but as for my study experience here, actually the government or the media are quite biased against the other countries that may have different human rights ideas or views with them. Just like several days ago, a postdoc in his course posted a picture in his class, cited a newspaper or some news from some news media or NGO government NGO, and he posted that picture just to improve that there's some kind of human rights violations in Xinjiang, but the logic behind that is this media are critical to the government, and so they are incredible when they discuss some other issues in other countries or something like that. But he just cited this kind of misinformation and groundless information to regard this as the fact to deliver this course to several hundred of students. So this is kind of issue that like Peter just said, we should stress this kind of human rights issues in the education. I don't think this is the right way to deliver this kind of misinformation to the students, even because this is a highly controversial or highly debated human rights issue regarding China. And other, sorry. And in regard of other experts mentioned, we need the political will or the power to strengthen the cooperation between the North and the South. I think it's quite difficult. Actually, this is a quite difficult way, because the West are always not always maybe inclined to think that their human rights criteria or the values are the best or better than other countries' human rights views, and we should adopt the same criteria or standards. And so they always try to adopt a manner of shaming or naming. And so this is not the constructive way. I think we should maybe have more constructive dialogue in the United Nations level or like the Human Rights Council. But it's I think just take the Netherlands as an example. Here in the VU Amsterdam, there's a cross-cultural human rights center that is which is aims to develop a mutual sharing or understanding of the human rights views between the China and the West, and to provide a platform for the experts from all over the world to share their views. But actually, it is not very. There's no a friendly environment for them to do this kind of research here. So now it is under investigation by the government. I think they're doing the research because they support the ideas of China or the. So it is very hard if we don't have the political will from the West, or just like the Netherlands government. If they don't want to, if they don't really respect the diversity or the cultural background or the social system or the political system in other countries like China, it will be very hard for us to really establish a forum or platform to communicate, to strengthen the mutual understanding. This is part of my experience here, studying here, and my feelings here. And actually, I heard Peter mentioned, there were the human rights changes a lot between 1948 to today, and we should maybe formulate a universal a new universal declaration of human rights today. But I think it is one of the direction we can strive for. But I think it's kind of hard because we don't have that opportunity, just like the end of after the Second World War II and after the Holocaust massacre of human life. But the pandemic also showed us we have different methods or measures to deal with the COVID-19, and it proved that China did a very good job in protecting the right to life. But the Western, I just like in the Netherlands, every day we have thousands of new confirmed cases and maybe several lives taken away by the virus. So we can usually have some reflection on the human rights. And also, I heard Peter mentioned there's the priority of rights. So I think this is the specific. This is the maybe the content of diversity. We should respect the priority of rights. If some people are starving, we should maybe respect the right to food or something like that. Not just the rights to peaceful assembly or other civil rights. We should respect the priority and government have to best protect the human rights, not just the criteria that the Western countries have adopted in their own country. So this is some of my thoughts here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Shengxi. Thanks for sharing us with your perception of human rights based upon your own experience studying in the Netherlands. Actually, the latter part of your presentation is similar like the summarization of the panel discussion. It reminds me that we have come to the end of the panel discussion. How time flies. Okay, so before we wrap up the discussion, I would like to ask each and every discussant to summarize their opinions in one sentence. Okay, in one sentence. To finish this session. Okay. So who would like to take the first?
I'll take the first. Okay.
Yes, please.
I think that if we're talking about human rights, then we're saying that we're all human, and that requires then some element of equality. It also requires some element of quality in terms of relationships between human beings.
Yeah.
I think I was the second, so my turn now. I think there are still a lot of things that we could deep, no? I was fascinated by the opinion of Xi Shang So she talked about the image, no, the construction of image by media, or the sort of symbolic society. So I think we have also to elaborate what Antonio apports, very important, the topic of the pain as a common ground of humanity. But is it still true, this? I mean, if we think that without new technical, scientific approach, we have tools to escape to reality. I think about Mediaverso, no? The meta-reality, to escape the pain, to escape the main characteristic of human life, that is the link with death, with pain. So what is human now, no? Do we need more imagination, more a creative spirit to elaborate what human rights mean? I have this final question, no observation.
Yes, Peter.
Well, I was just thinking if I should add my one sentence to the many sentences I have to speak later. Take seriously that human beings are social beings. That would be my one point.
Yeah, Mehmet.
I will only repeat the things I tried to mention. I will say again, finally, I have nothing more to say, that we should socialize with all the aspects of equality, etc., which I also touched upon, which I agree. We should socialize the issue of human rights as a tool to take away the ideological wheel. And I think this is the most important thing. What we should do as critical analysts, let's say, of the human rights issue. This is something I wanted to say.
Yes, Huiru. Sorry, Huiru, you are on mute. Yes.
Oh, sorry. Well, thanks for this opportunity. A quick summary of mine would be that in view of the divergent approaches of achieving or realizing human rights from different countries, there is no universal model of human rights that's one fit for all. And we should be really aware of the abuse of human rights, such as diplomatic weaponry or as an excuse for humanitarian intervention or unilateral sanctions. That's
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you.
Yes. Arnold?
Yes, there is no such thing as universal human rights, and the UN Charter may be outdated because in the preamble, it was established in 1948. The preamble says barbarous acts have taken place. This is in reference to Nazi Germany. But now in 2022, there are other countries, such as the United States, who has taken up the mantle of the Nazi experience. And we have to deal with these types of barbarous acts when we oppose the notion there is universal definition of human rights.
Okay, thanks, Arnold. If nobody has anything else to add, so let's turn the conference over to Peter, who is going to give a concluding remarks on the conference. Thank you very much again. Thanks for investing your time in the panel discussion. Peter, please take the floor.
Well, thank you from my side as well to engage in this discussion, which I think is only part of a long process. And I would not say we need immediately a new universal declaration, but it is, as I pointed out in the beginning, it's part of a long process where the economic foundation or the foundation of what society is about changes more or less fundamentally, slowly, but surely, and in some cases, actually not slowly, but very fast. The Netherlands had been accepting diversity in a completely wrong way for many years. And they said, if foreigners are coming, just fine. We don't do anything about their integration. And then it came to the shooting of Van Gogh, making aware of the disintegration of an integrated foreign community. They have been left alone. This is, I think, what I mentioned with this one sentence. We have to be aware of human beings being social beings. Being social beings means as well that they are part of nature, or part of nature, the non-human nature. I was recently, last week, actually talking to somebody from the Human Rights Council in preparation of a meeting on the 7th of March. Part of it is or will be the discussion of new rights we need, new items we have to consider. The extension of territories is one thing that happened after 48. The decolonialization, even if it was incomplete. The consideration of new kind of rights, the right of nature, the ecological rights, very important, hugely neglected. This is why I said we have to act fast in several areas. This is something we have to solve today by redefining rights, as well in terms of limiting the rights some people, some corporations have and execute. And we have to think about this is a process that happens, what rights are, how they are defined. The governance, move to governance as well in law, and the reconsiderations of norms. We have, when we talk about law, we are dealing with normative frameworks. This is very important. We are not dealing with just some bills, some acts, very dry material if you go to court, but these are lived norms in one way or another. And this is, I think, important in the entire debate when we talk about socialization of rights. Very important to consider this as part of a contradictory process of the changes of society. And society, as Engels said, the economy is about how people produce their life, their daily produce and reproduce their daily life. This is happening now. If we talk, I cannot extend this in depth, but this is something that happens in front of, not only in front of our eyes, we are part of it. And we are part of the contradiction. Digitization, artificial intelligence means that at some stage cars may have rights. A car won't be going to court, but if it's driven by artificial intelligence, there's a completely new situation in terms of law, how to deal with this. But as well, how do we deal with this? Disempowerment and empowerment at the same time. These means are or mark a development that can empower us. If you look at the internet, if you look at digital instruments, we have means at hand, in principle, that are changing the economic setting completely. The question, cui bono? My students know about this, cui bono, who is benefiting from this? This is always the question of law. Who is benefiting of what we are doing with law? Who is benefiting as well? How do we use these technical means we have? In the beginning, there was a word, yes. In the beginning, there was the idea of a sharing economy. This was a term that had been used. Sharing economy today, as it in many countries is, in most of the countries is we share in terms of, we get the profit, Mr. Zuckerberg, Mr. Gates, and we leave it to others to take the work on. At the same time, there is this potential we have with a sharing economy if we make it a really sharing economy. And this is something Arnold mentioned, the one article in the UDHR, democracy. There is another thing in the UDHR, and this is the economy. Predominantly, Article 23, and then it goes through, it is the capitalist economy. But there is as well an article on the self-determination, the economy in favor of what people need. This came up in different contributions, and this is, of course, depending on the potential we have in each country, but it is as well in this way universal of the shift we need in economic thinking. It is not about the accumulation of wealth in the hands of the few, but as a matter of human rights, it is the socialization as well of the responsibility. And this is not a matter of voluntary action, leaving it to foundations who do good in part, but it is a matter of the right defining what this good is, and this is a matter of defining what the common good is about. Complicated when it comes to the legal settings in detail, but very important to consider this as a guiding line, as a guideline for what it is. Part of this economic setting as we have it, I mentioned it earlier, is competition. Competition as well between nations and between individuals. The invention, a colleague used this term talking about funny lunch, easy talk about Montesquieu and these things, the invention of the individual. It had been a huge progress. Montesquieu, he mentioned, as kind of the inventor of the individual, shifting as well the discussion on rights. But what it meant was giving individuals the power to be economically active. That was time against the feudal system. Now we need the social individual being empowered by new economic thinking to act against those who have, that's about 5 in the West, 5 companies, the big data tech industries, that have the power over the entire economy. And it's not only about these 5 enterprises, it is about the small enterprises that are delivering to them. If they don't deliver, they are lost. This is a way where we have to think as well about, I have my doubts, but where we have to think as well about, is civil society possibly replacing the individual? What was the individual against the feudalism? Is civil society possibly the new actor? I would agree to some extent. I wouldn't have my hesitation when it comes to looking at populism, looking at the developments there, because civil society can be a variety of different organizations and different forms of articulation. To deal with these issues, I think is important, and this is my really concluding sentence, kind of maybe 2 sentences, to take things seriously, that we are not, or that we are at the beginning of a debate, and we will not find a solution today or tomorrow. It will be part of a long process, and it will be part of a contest of difference. And this is what we have to accept. And this is as well something, now I speak for the Human Rights Center in Changsha, that we try to do there, engaging with people from different countries, from different regions, from different academic backgrounds. engaging, coming together, trying to find a solution by looking at differences, by looking at how can we move on together. In this way, really the final sentence, thanks to the Human Rights Center, thanks to Mao for making it possible to work in this framework. And I hope this is just the beginning as well of closer cooperation. We have already the Human Rights Group, and we are working there with some colleagues. And I hope this is really something where we can move on in a positive way. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you for Professor Dr. Peter Herman's concluding remarks. Okay, I saw more hands up, and can I say something before we invite George and Mariel's contribution? Would you please turn on your camera so that we can take a photo of this conference? Yes. Okay. Good. Yes. Celine, Ashley, Shengxie. So we are waiting for you. We are eager to see you. Okay, more faces are coming. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Thanks very much, Celine, Ashley. Yes, good. Thank you very much. Okay. Yeah, more faces are coming. Yeah. Okay, now we are taking pictures. Okay, yes. Thank you. Thanks for your cooperation. Okay. Yeah, George, Maria. So, Maria, ladies first. Sorry, George.
No problem.
Yeah. No, it wasn't a question. It was to greet Peter for his speech. So it's okay for me.
The same here. It was not a question. I was clapping after Peter's great concluding remarks.
Thank you. Thanks for your remarks. Okay, so if anybody wants to add more.
Well, I'm always bad in these things. I think it is my task now. Again, thanking all of you, not least Arnold, the poor man who is I don't know, it's still in the middle of the night, for joining. And thanks. With this, I want to close the conference. Thank you.
Okay, let's come to the end of the conference. So for more discussions, we welcome you to the Human Rights Group. Okay, for the next discussion.